All right, everyone, we've got lots to do tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and get started right on time. I'm just about a minute late, giving people a little bit of time to trickle in. If I haven't met you before, it's good to meet you. My name is Lauren Hodges, Dr. Lauren Hodges, and I co-own a company called Performance on Purpose. We are a performance and training company based in Florida, and we have been working with Turlock School District and all of you wonderful parents for the past few months. I can't believe it's coming to an end, this webinar series. Sad that it's coming to an end, but I'm glad you're on. And once again, if you didn't catch it before, this is going to be really hands-on tonight. This is really putting a whole lot of the tips and tools we've been talking about these past few months, not necessarily into action, but just designing systems to protect it. So make sure you grab a pen and paper as we're talking. You are going to need it, and we are going to be using this chat function a little bit tonight too. So keep an eye on that chat for me. This topic is so very important, and one that a lot of times we don't have. We think about it. If I was to poll everybody on this call, I would guarantee that all 100% of you would say, yeah, boundaries are really, really important. But if I asked you, well, how well are you doing protecting them? Boundaries, personal boundaries, boundaries between work and home, you might have a different comment. You might say, yeah, not so well. So it's an important topic. It's a very popular topic. And I think it's one that is incredibly valuable for us to be covering tonight. Before we get started, I have right away an exercise for you. What I would like for you to do is I want you to take a piece of paper, and at the top of it, I want you to write down one word. This is a person, a group of people, a thing that you would never surrender no matter what. So I want you to imagine that tomorrow, everything was stripped away from you, everything you have, everything you own, your job, everything. But you can have one thing that you would never surrender no matter what. And I want you to write down what that thing would be. So would it be family? Would it be your child? Would it be, a value like an integrity or honesty? Maybe it's your faith. Whatever it is, I want you to write that word down. And if you're comfortable, I want you to share that word in the chat with us. So what is something you'd never surrender no matter what? So write that down for me. And again, share in the chat if you are comfortable sharing that one thing you would never surrender. So first one I see is family. Of course, yeah. That's one we see a whole lot. Anybody else want to share? That would be mine. I'd never surrender my family. Whatever it is that you wrote down, I want you to keep that in your head. We're going to come back to that word, that thing. I know it's really hard to narrow down to one thing you'd never surrender, but I think it's an important thing to think about. So my children, I got another one there. Yeah, absolutely. So family, children, you probably notice a theme here so far. And usually when we ask this question, this is most of the time people report back somebody that they love, someone or a group of people, family, children, spouse, etc., partner. So I want you to keep that word, that I will not surrender thing. Just keep it to the side, right? Keep it on that piece of paper. And I want you to keep it in the back of your mind as we're having this conversation. So let's dive in. Let's talk about boundaries and core values. You're going to see in a second here why I feel like it's important to tie those two conversations together. Oh, and I see one more, familia, family, absolutely. So this webinar was built upon the premise that, we bring our whole selves to work and to our family these days, right? And now more than ever, that's very true. So for those of us who are working parents and those of us who are managing households even, we live in this 24/7 hyper-connected world right now. And all of us are under pressure to take on more, do more, handle more, be on most of the time, to perform at our best, no matter if we're at work, at home, or whatever it is we're doing. And now more than ever, as I know you can relate from one parent to another, we're also challenged to operate in this new cohabitation of our personal life, our children's school life, and for a lot of us, our work life too, all under one roof, which creates this friction that some of us have never felt before. And a lot of us, for others of us, we've felt it, but it's been intensified like crazy this past year. Add on to that, kids, partners at home, just everybody in under one roof all the time, and it gets pretty wild. Even with them going back to school now for you, you still can probably feel some of that residual effect that it's had on your sanity. And sometimes it's hard to find the energy to manage all of this. In our company, as you already know, we believe that at our core, we are unique, integrated energy systems. We believe, as you know, that our sense of purpose and values, what we feel are our core values, help us show up at our best personally, professionally, and they also help us strive toward balance. Now, I do not believe there is such thing as work-life balance. I think that that's a whole other conversation, but at least we're striving toward it, right? We don't ever truly achieve it, but we're striving for it. But we also believe that, if you are a working parent, work can and should fuel meaning in your daily life. But it's hard to find this sense of meaning and hard to find the energy we need to show up at our best personally and professionally without being intentional about designing systems to protect our energy and help us live out this purpose and this sense of values. These are systems of growth that we're designing, and also systems of recovery, right? And we've talked about these systems of recovery: meditation, nutrition, exercise, sleep, these systems of growth. These are things like better managing your mental health, better finding space to quiet your mind, to get more focused. The only way to create sustained high performance in every area of our life, work, home, everything, is to design and protect boundaries in our work and in our home life. And I love this quote that boundaries themselves, they help us love ourselves and the people that we love at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And boundaries kind of enable that, right? They help us create the space to protect our most important asset, which, believe it or not, is us. And they help us also communicate our needs at work and at home. They give us the space to protect our energy. And when boundaries are in place, we're less overwhelmed. We experience less daily stress. The research shows all of this. We're more confident. We have higher self-esteem. We also have healthier, stronger relationships in our life, working and personal, right? Setting work-related boundaries. So for those of you who are working, those also help us define how much we give of ourselves to our job. And it helps us define it for ourselves, but also helps other people understand how much we're willing to give. It also helps kind of guide how you form relationships at work with other people. And that includes your managers, your bosses, your coworkers, colleagues, even your clients. Sometimes we let those boundaries kind of get violated for clients. So healthy work boundaries also kind of make the difference between professional fulfillment and burnout. Right? Engagement and disengagement. But at first, it's really hard to hold the line with boundaries. Why is that? Well, for one, a lot of us have never thought about this before. We've never actually sat down to create boundaries, let alone hold them. And actually, that's some of the work we're going to do tonight. And also, I think part of it is that we do here in the United States live in a world where dying to self, giving to others, us or them before us is a glorified concept. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's actually a quite good thing, but it's there, and it tends to it tends to infiltrate how much of ourselves we give to other people. And then on top of all of that, we do here in the United States love to associate business and success with burnout, right? Burning the candle at both ends, hustle, giving our all, more and more. And a lot of times we have this idea that we should have to sacrifice now for the promise of success later. And so with all of that kind of muddled up, boundaries are a lot of times the last thing that we hold, right? So what's really interesting is we actually perform at a higher level when strong boundaries are in place, right? So weak boundaries actually increase the likelihood of stress and burnout and mental health illnesses. And we know from the research that stress impairs what? Remember, focus, creativity, innovation, problem solving, relationship strength, and all of that. Now let's add another wrench in the mix a little bit. When we are stressed, which, we could probably all relate to feeling stressed these days, this past year, that actually adds a layer of difficulty in being able to see situations authentically. And so when we do feel overwhelmed and stressed, our brain sort of shifts to seeing everything in front of us, our to-do lists, our deliverables, our projects, even other people, as a threat. And this tends to lead to these predictable thought patterns that are pretty vicious, right? I don't have enough time. I'm not enough. I can't do this. I have too much on my plate. If I take a moment to breathe, I'll have a backlog of things to do. And then what do? We violate our boundaries when we do that. So this is why boundaries are really important, right? Much more important than we think in relationship to being high performers. And hopefully from the first webinar, when I say high performer, I'm not talking about how well you're doing your job. That's part of it. I'm talking about your ability to show up at your most best ideal self, personally and professionally, every day, right? So we want to be able to perform at a high potential and at the same time, stay happy, stay purposeful, connected to our why, and maintain strong relationships in the process, right? And that's really what boundaries can do for us. So the reason I bring values into the conversation is because clarity in our core values. And when I say core values, these are those attributes or character traits that you believe are most important in the whole world. Honesty, trust, relationships, service, compassion, whatever it is for you. We're going to get to that. When we have clarity in our core values, that helps us understand who we are. It helps us understand other people, and it helps create clear guardrails in our life to keep us on the path toward a life of meaning and purpose. So here's the way I like to think of it. The boundaries are the guardrails, and the core values are the GPS coordinates, the why, the destination of our life. And so the boundaries create the guardrails to get there safely and not derail too much and go too much off course, right? An agile, resilient person has the vision of who they want to be, core values, right? And then they create the right environment, boundaries, the right systems, right? To be that person most of the time. So values help you also, by the way, kind of understand why maybe sometimes you think differently than other people, why sometimes certain people just downright bother you, let's be honest, why some issues bother you and not others, more often than not, the friction that we have in our life with other people, more often than not, has to do with a conflict between the two core values or the core values that those two people hold. Think about the last time you had a fight with somebody or disagreement, or there was just somebody that rubbed you the wrong way, it more than likely core values were at the center of that issue, conflicting core values, right? So this can explain anything from politics and religion to relationships, to how you parent. Oh my gosh, the debate on vaccines right now, all these things, even how you manage your daily work is based on what you value most. So it's really important to have clarity in this area of your life. So what we're going to do is we're going to get clarity in these areas of our life. We're going to do, I know that's a lot of words on the screen, but the exercise that I want to do with you now is to clarify your core values. So we're going to create the GPS coordinates right now. Now, if I asked you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a minute or two, and I want you to read all the words on this screen. And I would like you to pick a couple of words, anything that you see on there that means something to you, that's important to you. And I know you could write down all of them. I want you to pick the ones that really stick out. I'm going to give you about a minute to do that. And in the second minute, I'm going to ask you to narrow that down to 2. So I'm going to make this really hard for you. And I want you to share those 2 core values that you hold most dear in the chat, and I want you to write them down at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute or so to do that. Any questions you have, you can put them in the chat for me. So a minute or 2 to write down the ones that you think might mean the most to you, and then sort of narrow that down to 2. And I'll share with you my 2 core values at the same time. So the goal here is not to get exact. I'm putting the time pressure on you because there's time pressure in the webinar. You could take this slide deck, because we send you the PDFs, they're always on the website. You could take this and you can think on it for a couple of weeks and you might come up with different answers. But read through that. What matters most? Thank you for sharing. So integrity and honesty, those are good core values. And they conflict a little bit with some of those other words on the screen, as you could probably see. Oh, beautiful. Love and passion. I love those words. Thank you for sharing that. Keep thinking on this. Write down the words that mean so much to you. Calmness, joy, relationships. I see another one on here on the chat. Calmness, joy, relationships. These are great. Thanks for sharing these. Keep them coming. I just saw that I have recognition on there twice. I need to fix that. Kind of a funny one to have on there twice. So we're in that second minute now. So you should be narrowing down from all the ones that matter to you. What are the 2 that stick out the most? If you've ever read anything by Brené Brown, she has an exercise similar to this in one of her books. It's very challenging. The reason I'm asking you to narrow to 2, by the way, before we move on, is that you could write down 20 words, character traits, things that are really important to you, values that are important to you. But the 2 top ones, all the other values inform them, right? And so it's almost like those 2 are the ones you're always striving toward, and the other ones have to be in place in order for you to uphold those 2 core ones. So let me give you an example. Service and relationships are my 2 core values. But in order to serve others and live in relationship with them and nurture meaningful relationships as I live my life, what do I need? I need integrity, honesty, love, joy, family, and balance, like somebody just wrote. I need all of those things. For all of us, this is going to be different. All of us. We're all going to have different words written on there. These are the ones that you want to strive toward, right? These are your GPS coordinates for your life. This is so very important to think about, because we want to anchor every day in these 2 words. We want to start our day with them and end our day with them. You want to put them on, I love Post-it notes by this point. Put them on a Post-it note, put them on your bathroom mirror, have them show up on your phone once a day. Start your day with those words. GPS coordinates, right? And now we're going to think about the boundaries that you need to put into play in order to protect them and uphold them, right? The guardrails. So I'm going to ask you to shift your mindset here for a second. Thank you for sharing those. You did an awesome job with that. What if who you are at your core defines how you organize your life and what you choose to focus your energy on? What if this shift in perspective resulted in greater performance across every metric of your life, all areas? Because it could. Sometimes our actions and behaviors day to day don't reflect what matters most to us. That's not because you don't value them, or you're losing your touch. It's because we don't have systems in place to protect them, quite simply. Where we might spend too much time focused on our jobs, focused on finances, focused on other distractions, social media, not being able to disconnect from work. All of that can impair our ability to stay grounded in our values, which, what does that do? Of course, increase our stress, impairs our ability to make good decisions for ourselves and for our families. And so core values are so very important. And let me give one more just touch on this. I want you to look at the core values that people have shared on the chat. Another one I see came up is calmness and relationships. Look at the core values that you wrote. For me, for example, just using my own because it's easiest for me, I know them best. Service and relationships are very other-centered. Have you noticed that a lot of the ones you have shared are other-focused? You are focused on other people, as you should be, right? This is the meaning of life, right? Is to connect with other people for the most part. And so,
blir en echt een focus on all the net.
Sorry, I think we have somebody that's off mute. There we go. Got it. Okay. So if my core values are service and relationship, this is a superpower, isn't it? This is what enables me to have a fulfilling life, but it's also my kryptonite. So I would ask yourself, and the reason I say it's also my kryptonite is sometimes I'm too other focused and I'm not protecting my own boundaries to make sure that I have energy to show up at my best. Right. And so it's important. It's important that you think about these things, and hopefully you have a good mindset shift here on just making sure that your values are what you're anchored in day to day, not the other way around. All right. Okay. So next thing that we're going to do is get to work on creating those systems, right? Those systems of growth and recovery, those boundaries or guardrails to protect us. So I'm going to ask you to create this chart on a piece of paper right now. You're going to have 4 columns. And this is where we're going to do a lot of the meat and potatoes of this work today. So what we're going to do is recreate this on a sheet of paper for yourself. Now, I do this with every single private client that I have. And every single one of them says at the end of this exercise, that was hard and that was so valuable. And so I really, really think you should do this with me rather than just listen. I really think that you should engage and do this exercise with me, along with me. First column. What you're going to write in that first column is what current boundaries you think you may have in play already that are working well. And I want you to circle or highlight, put a star next to, whatever, the non-negotiables, no matter what, that you would always protect that boundary. So I was talking to a client earlier today. We were actually doing this exercise, and she thought that she didn't have a whole lot of boundaries in play, but then we started to talk and she realized actually she did. So let me give you some examples on that first column. Number one, how's your sleep? Is it really important to you? This client of mine really values sleep. She makes sure she gets at least 7 hours a night. That's a boundary that she has in place. That means that she is setting the right bedtime and going to bed on time and getting up at a decent time as well, making sure she gets 7 hours. She also exercises 3 days a week. So she does create and protect time for exercise. That's a boundary. So do you have that in your life? Do you protect that time? Do you protect time for date nights with your partner, your significant other, or protected time just for your children? If you go to a sporting event for your child, a game or a practice, is your phone away? Are you fully invested in that game? No. What about boundaries around work and home, the transition there? Do you have good boundaries there? Another boundary that she brought up, which I thought I would share with you tonight, is she said her children's health comes before everything. So it doesn't matter how busy work is, what she's working on. If somebody needs her, they're sick, they're ill, they got in a car accident, whatever it might be, she's there. And that's a boundary, right? And so I want you to think about that. What boundaries do you have in play? Which ones are non-negotiable? The second column, and hopefully you're filling this out as I'm talking. The second column is where we may have weak, limited, non-existent boundaries. So where are your boundaries weak? Is this an area where you're not protecting time for exercise? You're not protecting time to quiet your mind during a work day. You're just running at that full sprint. Remember the oscillation? Do you have boundaries to ensure that you're protecting that time? Do you have boundaries in place? Let's say maybe Sundays are off. You don't work, you don't do anything but stay with the family, right? On those days. Or do you work weekends? Do you allow calls from work to come in at night? Do you have trouble putting your phone down when people are talking to you? Do you have boundaries around your phone use, social media use? That's a big one. So where do you have boundaries that are weak or limited, or maybe they just don't even exist and you need them? The third column will help you with the second column. So I want you to think about the emotions, the signs, the symptoms, the red flags, whatever it might be, that show up when a boundary is violated. Either you violated your own boundary, right? Or somebody violated it for you, a boss, a friend, a family member, whatever it might be. A boss, or a coworker, a team member. So let me ask you some questions here just to get your mind jogged. When somebody asks you to do something, do you ever say no? No. Do you cringe at that word no? Do you feel guilt, shame? Do you feel irritability, right? Or do you just get annoyed with people? Do you have negative self-talk if you violate your own boundary? Let's say you said you were going to go to bed at a certain time and wake up and exercise, but you stayed on your phone for an extra hour or two and you're too tired to wake up. And then you feel really guilty and you feel full of shame. That's a sign or a symptom, right? That you would want to write down. I feel guilt or irritability or whatever it is. Do you ever stop and ask and listen to your private voice and ask what you want in a situation? Or are you always other-centered? Because as backwards as it may seem, focusing on your needs actually helps you nurture relationship with other. So we do need that time, but are we protecting it? Do we have a system in place to protect it, right? Maybe you notice other people's boundaries that are weak or violated. Another way to think about this, if you are a working parent, think about that job. What would make you quit? What would be the thing that would make you quit? Would it be if you work during the weekdays, would it be having to work weekends? Would it be constant late night calls? Would it be long hours? Would it be your boss invading, your family time? Like, what would that be? Do you have back-to-back meetings and calls all day long? Or do you carve and protect time to breathe and get heads down work and email answering time in there? So I'm trying to give you a bunch of examples that I can think of, but the reason we want this third column in play is because we want to know when we have this emotion, guilt, shame, irritability, disengagement, that's actually a nice awareness builder that maybe a boundary has been violated. So we want to use that, right? And it also helps kind of unearth areas in our life where we might not have good boundaries. The last column is the hardest one to fill out, but this is the most important part. This is where we take action. Now you already see one example up there, and that is calendaring. But what ideas do you have that you can share with the group in the chat to help us design better boundaries or overcome these non-existent boundaries? So here are some things that I've picked up over the years, either from research or fellow coaches or other clients, that I think may be helpful as you're building this chart out. The first one is calendaring. Very easy. I mean, I say easy to set the calendar, harder to honor it, but easy to set. Look at your schedule during the week. Take out your phone, pull up your calendar, and block time for yourself to quiet the mind, reminders to go to bed, exercise time. I know for myself, unfortunately, the only time of day that nobody can get a hold of me is 5:30 in the morning. So from 5:30 to 6:30, that's my exercise time. And it's on my calendar so that no one can bother me. I also have time in the middle of the day. It's about 15 minutes or so where I carve and protect time to breathe, to have nothing, just to meditate. It's about that 15-minute window, right? What is the plan? Somebody just said, make a plan. Exactly. So calendaring is one way you can do that. Another way that you can do that, let's see if it'll come up, is community and communicating with others. Don't miss this. And I'm going to have an entire slide on this next, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But your boundaries are only as strong as your ability to communicate them. Your boundaries are only as strong as your ability to communicate them. So tell other people, ask for help, get somebody to help you honor those boundaries, to call you out. Best friends are good at that. Significant others are good at that. Coworkers are great at that, right? For example, if you have no boundaries around eating lunch at work in front of your computer, first of all, calendar some time for that. Second of all, get some coworkers recruited around you to help you. So if they see you answering emails during your designated lunchtime, they can send you that text message if you're working from home and say, get off your computer, go take a minute, go take a walk, right? Whatever it is, go eat your lunch. Another thing that we can do, no calls, no meetings. Now, for those of us who are working parents, this is a good one. Block time. And honestly, if you're just home and you're keeping up the house, you need this too. Block time for nothing, right? Carve and protect maybe a day or a half a day where you don't have anything on the to-do list, right? Except maybe catching up on emails or heads down work or creative work or innovative, whatever it might be. But just maybe you can calendar that out. Maybe you can work that out with a teammate at work or your team or your boss or whatever it is, everybody can use a no calls, no meetings day. So maybe that's something that you can throw in there as a good boundary protector. Another one, creating space for a quiet mind. So creating space for quiet is actually a really great skill to help you start to listen to your inner voice. We spend about 99% of our life outwardly focused on other people, other things, the future, the past, the to-do list, and other people. How often do we stop and turn the mirror inward? How often do we stop and listen to what we need? And when we do stop to listen to that voice and just pause, create space for quiet and listen, we actually might learn a whole lot about what boundaries we need and learn how to say no for those of us who have trouble with that. The next one I put up there is catchphrases. Now, I just needed a C word, a word that started with C, so I picked catchphrases. But what I mean by that is, are there things that you can say, sayings or statements or automatic email responses that you can push out to other people to protect your boundaries? So if you do have trouble saying no, somebody asks you to take on another project at work and you're already overloaded, have already a plan in place, a thing that you can automatically say, right? Or respond with a short, simple, compassionate, but direct answer. Whether it's saying no to a plan, whether it's honoring your lunchtime. I'll give you a great example. My son, when he has soccer practice, I try to protect the last 30 minutes of that soccer practice to watch his scrimmages, because he really likes when I watch them, and I like that too. So I don't mind answering a few emails here and there at the beginning, but if somebody calls me during his scrimmage, what I always do is I send them an email or text real quick, and I say, I saw your email. I will respond after my son's soccer practice, or I'll respond tomorrow, whatever it is. So just having that plan in place of knowing what you're going to say takes away some of the awkwardness of being in the moment. Another catchphrase you can use is, can I get back to you on that? Very simple. You're creating space to have time to listen to your inner voice and think about whether or not you want to take on whatever that person is asking you to do. Right? So that's another one that you can use. I think there was one more. Yeah, I think there's two more actually. Yep. Core values, obvious. It's stating the obvious, but your core values can actually serve as a great boundary. So like I said before, putting them on a Post-it note, right? To make them really visible in your room or whatever it is. Start your day with them popping up on your phone. That's just a really good way to help protect the boundary. And then whatever boundary it is you're setting. And the last thing you can do is disconnect to connect. This is a hard one, but if you do have trouble with getting rid of that technology that's tethered to you all the time, set reminders for yourself. Have a ritual that you put into play at the end of the day that really clearly distinguishes work from home, or set a boundary around maybe 30 minutes of social media a day and have a timer that goes off. I have a client who has the ringtone for the Flintstones. That Yabba Dabba Doo? It goes off at 5:30 every day at home. She's working from home, to remind her to disconnect and go connect with her sons, go throw baseball or whatever she does with them. So all of that to say, hopefully giving you enough time to think about these things. Do you have any suggestions for the group? I see one that says make a plan, and I love that. So if you have any suggestions you came up with as I was kind of talking through some examples, I would love to hear them. Anybody have any? Another thing to kind of think about as you're either responding or we move on here is, when should a boundary be violated? You might need to decide on that. Quick example of that, excuse me. My husband works for a hospital system here in Florida, in the Orlando area. And when this hospital is so great about honoring family life. I mean, he works in the finance section of the hospital, and he's home every day for dinner. They're a really good organization that really supports having work-life balance. When COVID hit, all of his team was assigned to a task force, and it was strictly designed for PPE procurement for the clinical teams, the doctors, the nurses, all the clinical staff. So he had his full-time job, plus he had to report at work at 7 a.m. and he didn't come home till about 11 at night, and he'd go to bed that night, come back the next day. I mean, this happened for about 3 weeks straight, nonstop work. Every boundary we had between work and home was completely violated. But you know what? It didn't matter. And the reason is we knew that this was worthy of a boundary violation because it aligned with our core values. Relationship, service, right up my alley. You need to do what you need to do to protect these men and women who are protecting us. That's in full alignment with my core values and was in full alignment with his. So all that to say, when is it okay for a boundary to be violated for you? Maybe you need to have that conversation with your team, your coworkers, your loved ones, your bosses, whoever, your best friends. When is it worth violating? When's it worth picking up that phone call? So somebody said, disconnect from negativity and think of something positive. I love that idea. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really good one. So if you do have negative thoughts popping up or somebody that's negative, disconnect, think of something positive, and maybe have that think of something positive at the ready, a funny joke or video or a picture that matters to you. Maybe it's just your core values. So thank you for sharing that. So just think for a moment. I told you we were going to come back to that first exercise. What I'd like you to do now is just reflect a little bit. Part of the learning process is just taking away a little bit of, we did 2 exercises here around core values and boundaries. And what I'd like for you to do is just think, did anything that we talked about in the past 30 minutes or so resonate with you? Were there any ahas, like, oh my gosh, I don't have boundaries in this area, or wow, I really do have really good boundaries in this other area, right? So what ahas did this reveal for you, right? So a couple I have on the chat. Meal plan. So are you asking me for one, or are you suggesting that that's a good boundary to have? Because I think it's a great boundary to have a plan in place so that you don't violate left and right. Another one comment came through: think, feel, behave. Your thoughts influence how you feel, which in turn influences your behavior. Absolutely. What boundary do we need to put in place in order to check in with how we're thinking about things? This goes back to my 15-minute meditation every day in the afternoon. I need that time to check in with myself. How am I doing? Where do I need to redirect? So I see another one. When my son needs to talk, I turn all off and let him know it's about him. I hear him and I see him. How beautiful. You're such an amazing mom. Thank you for doing that. It's really, really, we all know the feeling of walking into a room and asking for somebody's attention. Maybe you're at dinner, whatever it is, and they're looking down at their phone or they're looking at their computer, how that makes you feel. So very cool that you're honoring that. And you know what? There are times, let's actually be real here for a second, where your kids run into the room and you're in the middle of a call and they just start talking. And they need to understand that there is a boundary as well, right? And so it goes both ways. Listen, this is not black and white. This is not an either or. This is a yes and. Yes, we can put the phone down and totally fully engage with our children, our coworkers, our friends, our significant others when they need us. And we can have a catchphrase in play to let them know that it's not the appropriate time. So when my kids were home, for COVID, and they were at school at home, we had the whole signage thing on the door. Red meant I'm in a webinar. Shh, don't talk to me. Don't come in. Don't knock. Yellow meant proceed with caution, right? So you can knock. If I don't answer, don't bother me. And green meant come on into my office, you're fine. And we did pretty good with that, right? But you better believe, to your point, the person who said this, that when they were in the room, I tried my very best to disconnect from everything and give them my full and best attention. So the second bullet point here, you said you would not surrender that one thing. Remember, you wrote down in the beginning of the webinar, one thing you wouldn't surrender. A little bit of a face the truth moment. Are your boundaries ensuring that this holds true? Or are you unintentionally surrendering that daily? And this kind of goes back to that very comment about turning your stuff off and listening and focusing on those people who really matter to you. No wrong or right. It's just a question to help you sort of think things through. And then the third question is, what is one small step, you're going to hear it, too small to fail, that you can take right now to better protect your boundaries and stay in alignment with those core values? So what's one small step you can take? We're not going to wake up tomorrow and have perfect boundaries. We don't expect that. That's actually not very sustainable to expect that or try for that. So what's one small thing you can do in the right direction? Maybe it's just set a reminder to turn off your phone at a certain time. Balance priorities, I see in the chat. Good. Yep. Make a list of priorities and see if you can put that first priority first. So take a minute, reflect on these things, write them down, share in the chat. Make sure you're capturing these things, all of these reflective prompts. These are important. We actually learn and remember more from these trainings and webinars when we do take a minute to reflect on them and write down everything that we've just kind of learned that was sort of sticking with you. So I'm going to ask you now, if you're comfortable, to share in the chat what that one small step is going to be. So I'll give you a minute to write that down. If you're comfortable, share in the chat. What's that one small step you're going to take? Because remember, we're not asking you to change your life tomorrow. Just asking you to take one step in the right direction. So I have one person say, listen to understand and not just to respond. I like it. So getting really specific on that, I would challenge you. How are you going to remind yourself to do that? Maybe a reminder on your phone, maybe a Post-it note, maybe there's a time in your day that at the end of the day that you reflect on how well you did in that area. And that could be your focus for the next couple of weeks till it gets real sticky, that habit. Another person said, quiet time, meditate in the morning and evening, 5 to 10 minutes. I love it. Calendar it in right now before you forget. And I might suggest you just start with 2 days a week. Just so you can check off and say you were successful. If you did 5 days a week next week, awesome. But if you set the goal that's too small to fail at 2 days a week, much more likely you're going to be able to sustain that for the next several weeks until it becomes a habit. Love that idea. Next one, tell my other half that I am somebody and please talk to me and not at me. Love it. Good suggestion. And I do feel like that's an important conversation that needs to happen sooner rather than later. And maybe that conversation needs to have compassionate directness. Can't have one without the other when you are having those types of conversations. Come with compassion, come with directness. Small suggestion on that one. I would bring this core values exercise to your partner and get curious about what their core values are and see if there's any tension there and talk through it. That may be what's going on in terms of how that person's talking to you. Just a suggestion. Next person, set up an alarm, disconnect to connect with your son. I love it. You try it once, you're going to be hooked because it's so fulfilling to be able to really engage with that, to put that phone away, put that laptop away and fully engage. You're going to feel so fulfilled and so in alignment with your values. You're going to want to do it all the time. Really hard though. So set that reminder to break that habit. One quick thing about that, I'm looking at the time, we have time. One quick thing about that, I know we talked about this in a previous webinar, but our brains are not capable of multitasking. And so when we're trying to answer an email, answer a text, and listen to our son tell us about our day, our brain can't handle that cognitive load. It's actually called cognitive overload when that happens. And that triggers the stress response. And so when you get really snippy with your son, if you do say, just a second, I answer this text, or you get frazzled and you can't focus on whatever it is you're trying to work on because you've got multiple things coming at you, that would be why. And so focusing on one thing at a time is actually better for your performance in general. So double bonus, right? Connection with him. And then also you're going to be able to perform at a higher potential cognitively when you do that. Very hard to do when you have a long list of things. So set that reminder, hold that boundary. Fiercely protect your boundaries, you guys. Fiercely protect them, because they are what keeps you in alignment, right, with your core values. At the end of the day, you said you wouldn't surrender one thing. So you have to make sure at the end of the day that you can safely say your boundaries ensure that happened. Told you this slide would come up. Quick reminder, your boundaries are only as strong as your ability to communicate them. Who do you need to tell about this, right? Declare it to the world, right? Put it on your Facebook page. Tell your best friend, tell your significant other, tell your child if that's the person you're trying to engage with. They'll call you out quicker than anybody if they're of the right age, right? Which is like 3 on, right? They'll tell you. One more thing, try for no calls while cooking and eating dinner. Oh, I love that idea. Positive quality time. That's a really good idea. My business partner and I, of course, we teach this stuff, so it's a little bit easier for us, but we have kind of a one-word catchphrase text, family time. So he calls me and he says, hey, this is kind of urgent. And I text back, family time, what is it? He gets it. Oh, no, it's not that important. And so we had to have that conversation, though, of what determines whether something's urgent enough that I need to break that family time. So my point being, who do you need to have these conversations with? And why don't you have that conversation of what is worth breaking a boundary, and have that conversation with people? Really get to know yourself and what is worth breaking a boundary. So to this person's point, no calls while cooking and eating dinner, positive quality time, amazing. Is there anything that would cause you to answer that phone? What would that be? Who do you have to have that conversation with, right? To make sure that you're honoring this goal. So great ideas, really, really great ideas. So the last thing I really wanted to say here was just sort of in closing, don't forget that your values give you the ability to maintain your course through anything, not just through life, anything, challenge, change, storm. Your values help you maintain the course, right? They're the GPS system. They're what gets you there, right? And they course correct you when you do get off trajectory too. So things happen, boundaries are violated. Core values really serve a great purpose in that your reminder of your core values help you come back on course, right? And then of course, the boundaries themselves are the guardrails to make sure you get there okay. And it's okay if you violate them here and there. don't be too hard on yourself, but get connected again with those core values if you can. And then the other thing I just wanted to make sure I close with, remember to protect them fiercely. Remember to protect those boundaries absolutely fiercely. Remember that there's that one thing you would never surrender no matter what. And keep that as a reminder for yourself. Because here's the thing, when you practice setting healthy boundaries, when things aren't so hard, and you really build up that muscle of strong boundaries in these areas, it's during the worst storms that training in these areas of boundaries and aligning with our values really shows its worth later on. The bigger the storm, the more we revert to reaction and survival habits, okay? And so this is where positive rituals like boundaries become really important. So train on them now before the storm strikes, all right? So are there any questions before we part ways? I'm sad to say it's our last webinar, at least for now. And, thank you so much for your time and engaging in this process. And for those of you who have showed up to all these webinars over and over again, just thank you so much for being present for yourself and your children. And thanks again to Turlock School District for letting this happen, because I'm so very thankful that I was able to reach you parents in a time like this. If you need anything, there's our website. You can reach out to us, ask any questions. Thanks so much for being here and having an incredible rest of your school year.